In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about some of the psychosocial changes that occur in midlife. You will see in today's lecture that there are lots of individual differences, so not everybody is going through the same level of psychosocial change as someone else during this time period. But we're going to be talking about topics such as an identity crisis, which we have touched upon in previous course or classes, and then also issues related to identity and autonomy and personality changes as well. If we were in class, I would ask you to conjure up thoughts of, what a midlife crisis looks like. And I know we've talked a little bit about this already in lectures, so it's not completely out of the blue for you. But the idea of, what do you think about if you think of a midlife crisis in a man? Are you thinking about a new sports car or, a new hot girlfriend or a new boat or things like that? What do you think about for someone who is a woman going through a midlife crisis? Do ideas about cosmetic surgery or maybe dressing younger than one used to, do these ideas come to mind? And so, what I want to talk about now is not necessarily are those stereotypes true or supported by the research, but what really is going on during midlife? Are identity crises common? Um, we talked about midlife crises a little bit when we were talking about adolescence. Again, the idea that during the time period where parents have adolescents, they may be in midlife. And it's interesting because we talked about the overlap of crises when we talked about adolescence, and they're both sandwich generations. Adolescence is kind of sandwiched between childhood and emerging adulthood or adulthood. It feels like being in between still, and midlife is there too. So we talk about a midlife crisis. This is often conceptualized as this time of self-doubt, this time that's kind of stressful. Somebody has concerns about their body. We've talked about these ideas before. And maybe there is this major reconstruction of their personality. So behaviors that they didn't used to do, they now do, individuals who are having this crisis. So for example, if there's a person who used to be pretty inhibited and kind of led a narrow life, if they're having a crisis, more likely to go out and party and socialize. So this could be stressful to family members because they're like, I don't even know who you are anymore. When we talk to people broadly who aren't informed on the research, and this isn't even necessarily age specific of people who might have these ideas, but many people are expecting a midlife crisis, like almost like maybe not to the same degree. Not everybody can go out and afford to buy a sports car, but again, just like expecting that this time is going to be changing or a person is changing quite substantially. This is similar again to adolescence, when if we have these assumptions that adolescence is this time period of storm and stress, of turbulence, what does that mean for adolescence and actuality? In as it goes for midlife crisis, there's little evidence that middle age is turbulent for the average middle-aged adult. So it's not to say that a midlife crisis doesn't occur, but it's not for most individuals. So in one large-scale survey, about a quarter said that they experienced a midlife crisis, and this was self-report data. But what they found when they looked deeper into that data is that it wasn't like, okay, so suddenly I turned 45 or I turned 50 and my, life has totally changed. Really, what these individuals are saying who say that they have experienced a midlife crisis or are experiencing one is that for those individuals, they have some kind of challenging life event. And so what's happening is that, perhaps they had to put life on hold for a while, and this is the turning point. It's not really a crisis. It's just that these life events are changing their lives in a way that is more drastic than if they didn't have these specific turning points. To go back to adolescence, again, the idea that it's not adolescence itself that causes moodiness, right? Or upheaval or storm and stress, but just other life factors that might lead somebody to struggle more than somebody else. So again, here in this sample, you don't need to know a quarter necessarily because it is in just one sample and it is self-report data, but it is a small percentage. I mean, it's still sizable, but small compared to, saying like all middle-aged adults are going through this crisis. Um, so, who is this crisis more likely to occur to? So, again, people who are going through life events, but also for those who may have had limited ability to fulfill their goals. So, for example, if they, just going back to Erickson's term of choosing lives prematurely, so a foreclosure, if they have had children early, and not that this applies for everybody, but then they have family pressures and they weren't able to explore. Those who are from lower socioeconomic status brackets, for lots of reasons. Poverty we know is a stressor just broadly. And for some of those individuals, if they weren't able to really kind of reach their full potential, then it might come a point in middle adulthood where it's like, now what? Who am I? I haven't had a chance to question these things about myself. So a crisis might be more likely to those individuals. Um, and just to go along with those idea, if with that idea that if you ask those in midlife about regrets or life regrets, people who have more regrets in their 40s are more likely to be those who are going in the direction of a crisis. But a crisis is quite variable, right? Is it just a little bit or is it a lot? That's going to vary quite substantially from person to person. Going along with that idea of variability and just how, what does a crisis look like from one person to the next? This made me think about cosmetic procedures that are performed worldwide. And cosmetic procedures could be done for a variety of reasons. I'm not talking about procedures that are done to fix something that needs to be fixed. This is something that is more of an elective procedure, is how I'm talking about it here. But these are changes in our appearance. And these changes of appearance might come because of the aging process. So if I am concerned about how I look because of the aging process, and remember, we already talked about this when we were talking about menopause, for example. And if we are in a culture where youth and looking young is really desirable and put on a pedestal compared to having wrinkles and looking older, well, then this is the societal message that we're receiving, and it could cause us to want to change our appearance to fit the ideal. There are lots of surgeries and procedures that one can get done in order to look younger. And some of these are non-invasive. So, for example, Botox that makes you look like you don't have any wrinkles. People get fillers injected into mostly their faces, but sometimes other wrinkles on their body to reduce the wrinkles. Chemical peels in order to make your skin look younger. These are quite common. Obviously, there are more invasive surgeries like getting a breast augmentation and things like that. When we look at the data, 90% of cosmetic procedures are done on women broadly. So this is not specific just to this age range of midlife, but most of them are done on women. And that largely goes back to, again, what are our ideal standards? And do we hold those standards higher for women than for men? And the answer in the Western world is yes. There are some interesting racial differences. So when we look at cosmetic procedures broadly, about 3/4 of the procedures that are done yearly are done on white women. And again, we can go back to what are the societal standards. The interesting finding here, and I'm not saying that this is indicative of a crisis necessarily. I'm saying that it's indicative of these changes that are happening. that we see that most cosmetic procedures are done on middle-aged individuals, and more specifically, middle-aged women. And I know that this figure isn't necessarily the easiest to read, but you see that there's data from different, like 2 or 3 year periods. Actually, some of the data is from longer, so these are each from different studies. And what we see is that for each of those studies, it doesn't matter which one you're looking at, the group that's between 35 to 50, and obviously midlife, we're going to go into that 51 to 64 age too. So depending on how you're breaking up the lifespan. But regardless, 35 to 50, we see the biggest or the largest number of individuals who are electing to get cosmetic procedures. Part of that might be because people have more or starting to have more income then compared to, let's say, those from the 19 to 34 range, because cosmetic procedures are elective, so they're not covered by insurance most often. So that's part of it, but part of it has to also be coming down to our societal values of youth and beauty, and also these changes in appearance that are just happening. So again, is this a crisis? Does this mean that we're going through a midlife crisis if we decide to get cosmetic procedures? No. Are there individual differences? Yes. Are there some individuals, women and men, who are electing to get cosmetic procedures because they are going through this major restructuring of personality? Of course. I just think the data is interesting because we can definitely see a clear pattern, no matter which study you're looking at, that these procedures are considerably more common for individuals who are in this midlife period.